It's one thing to hear the stories passed down through generations, but another to know the Wendigo once walked among us, possessing, consuming, and driving people to madness. Take the case of Swift Runner, the man who claimed he was overtaken by the spirit of the Wendigo. After his capture, Swift Runner didn't even deny it. His confession was chilling, even for the time. He spoke of the harsh winter, how the snow piled high, sealing them inside their small cabin, far from any other people. His family looked to him for hope. He was their leader, after all, a strong hunter. But even the strongest can break under the cruel weight of starvation. Days passed, and hope of rescue disappeared under the relentless snowfall. The woods that had once provided food and safety became an endless white wasteland. That's when Swift Runner said he heard the voice, faint at first, like a whisper on the wind, but growing louder with each passing day. It told him to eat. It told him that the only way to survive was to consume the flesh of those he loved. His mind resisted, but the hunger gnawed at his sanity. The more he resisted, the louder the voice became. It was no longer just in his head. He could hear it outside, scratching at the walls of their cabin, moving around the trees, growing closer. His family grew weaker. His children, once full of life, were now gaunt shadows of themselves. His wife begged him to stay strong, but it was too late. One night, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, he couldn't resist any longer. The Wendigo spirit had taken hold. Swift Runner claimed he was no longer in control, that the creature consumed his mind as much as he consumed his family. By the time the snow melted and search parties arrived, nothing remained but bones and a man whose eyes were as hollow as the woods that surrounded him. He was sentenced to death. But the Wendigo? It still haunts those forests, waiting for the next soul weak enough to surrender to its hunger. But where did it all begin? Some say the first Wendigo wasn't a man who simply gave in to hunger, but a cursed hunter, someone who defied the spirits of the land. The story goes that long ago, before the arrival of settlers, there was a village deep in the northern forests. The people there lived in balance with nature, taking only what they needed, respecting the spirits that dwelled in the wilderness. But there was one hunter, proud and arrogant, who believed he was above the old ways. He was skilled, no doubt about it, but his greed was insatiable. While the village prepared for the harsh winter, he hunted more than his share, hoarding food for himself. As the snows came and food became scarce, the hunter refused to share, letting others starve while he gorged on his spoils. One night, a fierce storm swept through the forest, stronger than any seen before. The village was buried under snow, and the hunter found himself trapped in his own arrogance. Days passed, and the storm raged on, cutting him off from his village, his food stores dwindling faster than he had expected. His hunger became unbearable, gnawing at him like a beast. That's when the Wendigo spirit came to him. The storm had been sent as a punishment by the spirits, a warning against his greed. But the hunter, driven by desperation, ignored the warning. He wandered the snow-covered woods, searching for anything to eat, when he stumbled upon a group of travelers, lost in the storm. Without hesitation, he killed them and consumed their flesh, believing it was his only chance to survive. But the moment he tasted human flesh, he was cursed. His body began to change, his limbs growing long and twisted, his face becoming skeletal, his hunger never satisfied. He became the first Wendigo, doomed to wander the forests, always hunting, always starving, but never able to feel full. His greed had transformed him into a monster, and his spirit now haunts anyone who dares to let their own hunger for more consume them. Some stories say you don't have to be in the woods to be taken by the Wendigo. Sometimes It comes to you in your sleep. The Ojibwe people tell of a man who was plagued by terrible nightmares. Every night, he would dream of a cold, dark forest. He would be alone, stumbling through the snow, hearing footsteps behind him, but never seeing who or what was there. In his dreams, the air was always bitterly cold, and the trees loomed tall and menacing, like skeletal figures watching him. Each night, the dreams would last longer, the shadows closing in around him. And then, one night, he saw it. A gaunt figure, towering over him, with glowing eyes and long, sharp teeth. The Wendigo. When he woke, the cold from the dream lingered, chilling him to the bone. He tried to shake it off, but the dreams kept coming, night after night. And with each dream, he felt weaker, hungrier. During the day, he couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. His body began to waste away, and soon, the man was unrecognizable, pale, hollow-eyed, consumed by an insatiable hunger. One day, he disappeared into the woods, never to be seen again. They say the Wendigo had taken him, that the dreams had been the creature's way of calling him, luring him deeper into the forest until he could no longer resist. Another tale tells of a group of hunters who ventured deep into the northern woods, determined to track a large moose that had been spotted near their village. The hunters were seasoned, used to the dangers of the wilderness, but this time, something felt different. The forest was unnaturally quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. After days of tracking, they set up camp near a frozen lake. That night, as they sat by the fire, they heard something moving in the trees. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but then came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching through the snow. One of the men stood up to investigate, but when he stepped away from the firelight, he vanished into the darkness. The others called for him, but there was no answer. They searched the woods for hours, but found no trace of their friend. Then, the next night, another hunter disappeared. This time, they didn't even hear him go. One moment he was there, the next, gone. Fear gripped the remaining men. They huddled close to the fire, watching the shadows, listening for the footsteps they knew were coming. The Wendigo was stalking them, picking them off one by one. By the time the search party arrived weeks later, only one man remained, delirious and frostbitten, mumbling about glowing eyes in the dark and the cold breath of the Wendigo on his neck. He never recovered, and the other hunters were never found. These stories, these legends, they are more than just warnings of harsh winters and desperate times. They are reminders of the darkness within us all, the greed, the hunger, the fear that can turn us into monsters. The Wendigo is out there, somewhere waiting for its next victim, perhaps in the deepest part of the forest, or perhaps right behind you.